So the January issue of our newsletter, I wrote an article about one of the conversations that's been going on in some unity circles. And there's a question that I've heard several times, and the question is this: what do we, Unity, have to offer to the next generation that's unique? That's an important question. The late great Eric Butterworth, Unity minister and very popular author, framed it like this. He said, "A religion, to be a contemporary influence, must be redefined for every generation in the light of that day's thought." Some wise words there, and I know that some folks have a little bit of an allergy to the word religion. Yeah? So take that word, replace it with whatever you want. Movement, spiritual community, corporation. I mean, it applies to them all. Even if we think that we're teaching an eternal spiritual truth, we still need to be aware of how knowledge changes and grows over the years. And if we don't do that, we run the risk of becoming irrelevant. Church, religion, corporation, whatever. And in case you haven't looked around and noticed it yet, there's an up-and-coming generation that looks at the world a bit differently than we did, or we do even now. Seems like every new generation that comes along, they want to establish their own special identity, and that's great. I'm cool with that. Starts with superficial things, though, right? Like clothing, the way they dress. Piercings, hair, tattoos today, that's a big deal. My generation went through it. Some of you may remember those creatures that we used to call hippies, right? Anybody remember? Those creatures we used to call hippies. Well, I'll tell you what, today they are known as hipsters. Hippies, hipsters. Some things don't change that much, I guess. And if you need a good example of what they look like, go down to Whole Foods in Roseville and hang out there for a while and look around, and I guarantee you'll see a whole bunch of them there. In fact, I swear there's probably something in their job application which asks them, have you been to Portland? Do you listen to indie bands? And especially to the men, do you now have, or are you willing to get, a man bun? Does anyone know what a man bun is? A picture. Yeah. Seriously, have you seen it? That's a hipster thing there. The man bun has become a thing, and what I've heard is that the man bun of our era is going to be viewed in the future the same way that we look at this next one here, the mullet. Anybody remember the mullet from the 70s, which is mercilessly mocked today? I got a confession to make. I almost had one. Believe it or not, I used to have enough hair where I could actually do that. I came very close to having one of those, but fortunately, I had a group of supportive and caring friends. They talked me out of it because you know what they say: friends don't let friends get a mullet, or something like that. So, despite the emphasis on appearances, though, if we can overlook the emphasis on appearances, I've always rooted for the rebels. Each new generation that comes along, the teens, the 20-somethings with their new ideas, their different looks, I see that. I secretly hope that they succeed in turning things upside down and inside out, but somehow that never quite seems to happen. Not quite like that. And I think it's because in their zeal, and we went through it too, in our zeal to be unique, to be special, to be seen as rejecting the values of the preceding generation, when they do that, they cease to be unique, right? Think about it. They dress like each other, they look like each other, they listen to the same music, you watch the same TV shows, and you end up becoming just as big a bunch of conformists as anyone else who came before. in their great zeal to be unique, they end up being just like everyone else. Go to Whole Foods, you'll see. But despite that, I hope they never give up. I hope they never stop trying. Keep trying to shake things up. Because it has to start somewhere. It has to start somehow. Even if it isn't something that turns the world upside down and inside out immediately, it's like planting a seed. You know, most major change that we experience, it's incremental. It builds on what came before. It's evolutionary rather than revolutionary. It has nothing to do with tattoos and piercings or skinny jeans or any of that stuff. Maybe the ones who dress and behave differently, they're the ones who plant that seed. I mean, look at how long it took for marriage equality to become the norm in this country, which it is. At one time, not too long ago, it would have been controversial to argue that a man and a woman working the same job should be paid the same wage. You'd get an argument if you suggested that. The seed gets planted, and it's always in the form of an idea. And we all know where ideas originate, right? In consciousness. Always at the level of consciousness. So, an idea at the level of consciousness may well be revolutionary and even dangerous. And that's what our Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore was up to back in the late 1800s. He had some revolutionary ideas about religion in general and Christianity in particular, and I'm sure that there were a lot of people then who considered those ideas to be dangerous. How dare he suggest that the stories in the Bible might not be literally true? No talking snake? Oh my goodness. How dare he tell people that they are as much a son or daughter of God as Jesus was? How dare he? Blasphemy, heresy, they said. Here's something that Charles wrote back in 1895 from one of the early Unity publications. This will give you an idea of some of his dangerous ideas. Here's what he thought. He said, "We've been readers among all schools of thought, and we find good in all of them. We do not claim to have discovered any new truths, nor have had any special revelation of truth. There is truth in every religion. It is my privilege to take truth from any source, put it into my religion, and make it a fundamental rule of action in my life." Again, you got a religion allergy? Get rid of that word, substitute it worldview, philosophy, whatever. And there's a lot to unpack. That's a fairly short paragraph. There's a lot to unpack there. Notice that he's not saying that all religions are equally good. He says something very different. He says you can find good in all of them. He doesn't say that every religion is true. He says that you can find truth in all of them. Everybody has a piece of the truth. We can learn something useful and valuable from just about everywhere that we look. We have to be curious. We have to learn how to ask the right questions. And another interesting thing in that paragraph is the sentence where he says, "We do not claim to have had any special revelation of truth." That's a biggie. And that's something that's echoed in some of his other writings. If we jump forward from 1895 to 1918, the same publication, we hear him saying this. He talks about Unity's approach to truth. He says, "It is in this respect totally different from the other religious systems of the world because it does not in any respect rest its authority upon revelation. It has no dogmas, nor creeds, nor are its students expected to believe anything which they cannot logically demonstrate to be true." That's the other piece of it. Special revelation. A special revelation is when a person or a group of people claim that God or some other supernatural entity gave them special knowledge or special truth. The Book of Mormon, that was a special revelation given to Joseph Smith. The Quran was a special revelation given to Muhammad. Many books of the Bible, especially the book of Revelation, of course, was written as a special revelation direct from God to the author. And it still goes on today. There are lots of books out there where people claim that this was directly sent to me via some entity. That's a special revelation. And what happens is this: if every group relies on their own special revelation for truth and for knowledge that's not subject to objective logical demonstration, that demonstration Charles was talking about, if it's not subject to that, it's going to be very difficult for there to be effective communication between them groups, because one group has their own theory that comes from the rabbit god, the other one has their own truth that comes from the duck god, and and it gets to be a mess. It gets in the way of communication. Maybe even makes it impossible, but at the very least, very challenging to effectively communicate. So Charles was onto something here. It had maybe the unintended consequence of helping to open up the channels of communication between these different groups out there, at least those who were willing to follow the evidence. We can all get along, even if there are different paths. That's what started to be demonstrated by the end of the 1800s with these crazy ideas of Charles Fillmore and other people like him. He was a free thinker. That's a good label for him. He was a free thinker. He was someone who refused to blindly follow the pronouncements of someone who called themselves an authority because they happened to be ordained or whatever it happened to be. He refused to follow special revelations, but insisted on following his own intellect and intuition, those wonderful human gifts that we all have. And he was following in the footsteps of some very famous people. There were other folks throughout history who were known as free thinkers. Probably the most influential free thinker in American history was a fellow named Thomas Paine. Wrote a little pamphlet called Common Sense that rallied support for the American Revolution, built around this idea of freedom. Of course, free thinkers have never been very popular in the world of mainstream religions, because mainstream religions tend to be authoritarian structures, which means you believe me because I'm an authority, and here's my special revelation, and you don't get to question it or else, right? That's how it works. Here's an example of a church sign that you'll still see today. A free thinker is Satan's slave, says Mills Road Baptist Church. Ooh, Satan. I'm really scared now. Satan, the authoritarian's favorite enforcer, right? The Tony Soprano of religion. If you don't do what we say, Satan's going to come and kneecap you or whatever it is. Satan's going to get you. They say traditional Christianity is dying. That's one of the reasons why. They treat people like children, or even worse, like sheep. In fact, the pastor-flock model is one of the oldest ideas in spirituality and Christian religion, and nothing against sheep, but people are not sheep, okay? Which is why I will gently correct people when they refer to either Karen or I as pastor. We are not shepherds. You are not sheep, okay? We don't use that model here. Charles Fillmore started to break that mold over 100 years ago, and a lot of things have changed since even then, which means we have to be constantly redefining and refining even the ideas of our co-founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. We have to keep looking at them, because otherwise we get locked into this ideological prison, instead of doing what Charles really wanted us to do, which is to keep questioning, keep learning. The year is 2016. Christianity doesn't seem to be reaching the up-and-coming generation. And a couple years back, Reverend Tom Shepard, who teaches at Unity Institute, he wrote a book called Jesus 2.1. Jesus 2.1, I like that title. There's Tom. And he talks about the problem. And he says this. He says, there is a crucial question Christianity must face if it is to survive in a pluralistic, postmodern, spacefaring, multi-species cosmos. Are humans creatures of the dust, bond servants of a jealous God, or are they creative expressions of spirit? Sisters and brothers in divine consciousness with all sentient beings, blossoming from the same energy that formed all matter and empowers everything to be? Question mark. That's a great one. And that's not something that just Christianity has to face. Okay, again, let's take that exclusivity out of it. It wasn't meant to be exclusive, but it is a unique problem for Christian denominations out there today, and it's also a question for all of humankind to keep looking at. And of course, I think you know how we would answer that question in unity. We would take that question and we would flip it around into an affirmative statement, which is what I'm going to do right now. So here it comes. Human beings are creative expressions of spirit. Sisters and brothers in divine consciousness with all sentient beings, blossoming from the same energy that formed all matter and empowers everything to be. That's unity for the 21st century. At least that's an aspect of it. That's a good starting point. So with that, we focus on what unites us, and then we can use our wonderful, wonderful minds to test every single claim and idea that's presented to us, especially those claims and ideas that are supposed to be a special revelation of truth, or that are based on the authority of someone who claims to have some special access to truth. By a right of consciousness, we get to take those claims and ideas and see if we can logically demonstrate them to be true. That dangerous, dangerous idea that we got from Charles Fillmore. We get to do that. And we also have to be prepared to accept the results of our examination and questioning. Jesus said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." He did not say that the truth will make you comfortable or that it will give you the warm fuzzies. Gloria Steinem said it best. The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. Too often we're willing to trade real truth for comfort. We ask our questions, we follow the evidence, and we don't like where it goes because it means we have to challenge some things that we've held dear, things that we've assumed. Well, guess what? It's not about comfort. Don't settle for comfort. Demand proof before you call it truth. Demand proof before you call it truth. Whatever the claim being made or the idea being advanced, don't be afraid to ask for proof. And remember this, the burden of proof is on the person making the claim or advancing the idea. You don't have to prove that it's not true. The burden is on the one making the claim. The late, great Christopher Hitchens once said that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Unity for the 21st century says that by right of consciousness, we are free to question, to explore, to use our human faculties of reason and intuition to decide what's true, what's real, and what passes for knowledge. And I think that's something that any hipster should be able to appreciate. I'll see you next week.